You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 260 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Today, we're heading to Highland, Perthshire in Scotland to meet sheep farmer Ed Munt. Ed is the shepherd at Mains of Merthley Farm, which was named Agri-Scot Sheep Farm of the Year in 2022. He runs 1,350 breeding ewes across around 244 hectares, as well as 400 homebred ewe lambs and 25 tups, 12 of which are in Novice Aberfield, and 13 terminals of either New Zealand Suffolk or Aberblacks. There's the detail for the sheep farmers amongst you. Ed, welcome to Meet the Farmers. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much for having us, Ben.
Pleasure to have you here. And I think it's been a little while since, so it's only been a little while since since we've purely been talking about sheep. We've had quite a few beef and sheep farmers on, but it's nice to just talk about sheep. Tell us a little bit about the farm first of all, and how you became the shepherd there.
Well, the journey here, I suppose, started. I was actually working overseas. It would have been back in 2016. I'd just about worked and expired my working visa over there, so I was looking to take a job on back in the UK. I'd never actually travelled much up in Scotland, but I knew it was sort of a part of the world or part of the UK I would have thought I liked. So I did start looking, and then quite lucky, and it was a brief exchange of a few emails and things with Callum, who's the owner here at Mains of Merthley, and it originally started as a placement type setup. So he was after somebody to come in and just give a hand, I suppose, at lambing through the spring. And I sort of worked there here for a few months, and that was it. That was 9 years ago, and I've never really moved far from here.
Where were you? Where were you before? Was it Australia or whereabouts were you traveling?
No, so I'd actually been over in New Zealand. I went over there back in 2014. It was through a previous job I was in. It was a connection with the fellow I was working for. It was a school pal of his that had a place out in New Zealand. And the idea was to, during our quiet period in the winter, I was to go over there for 4 months. Yeah, 4 months quickly turned into 2 years. And I thought, well, I've applied for a 2-year working visa, so I may as well use it while I've got it. So that was it, yeah. Predominantly worked up on a station in the North Island, just quite far north, actually, about 2 hours north of Auckland. Yes, and started up there, and then I did travel around a lot and worked on a few stations down in central North Island, and then did a short stint down in the South Island there as well.
Okay, you weren't tempted to stay longer after those 2 years?
I was, yeah, I certainly was, and the options were there. There was. I was very fortunate. There's made a lot of good connections out there, and there was the option to stay on and do a sort of scholarship type thing. But having originally left, only thinking I'd been away for 4 months, I think the family were quite pleased to have me back and see me back on home soil.
Yeah, for sure. Let's we will go back to your own journey in a bit, but let's turn to the flock and the farm. Tell us a little bit more about the flock and I suppose what you're trying to achieve with it, what your priorities are.
So yeah, like I said, I joined the McDermott family here and was brought into, like I said originally, just lend a hand, I suppose, through the spring. And like I said, things quickly transpired, and I was given the option to stay on. And I suppose back then, that was when I was sort of asking Callum Winner what was his intentions with the flock and where he wanted to go with it. And he'd been managing the sheep himself for probably the previous 3 or 4 years after the former shepherd moved on. And the flock was very mixed. a lot of mixed age ewes, a lot of older ewes running on. They were good sheep. They were a mix between sort of a Llyn based ewe with quite a bit of Texel and Cheviot through them as well, but they were very mixed. With some ewes, some mature ewes would have been running at probably 75, even as low as sort of 60, 65 kilos, up to some of the big Texel cross ewes would have been, 100, 110 kilo ewes.
Yeah.
And I suppose trying to manage those sheep as a whole flock, as we were then, they were very much mixed. Yeah, it proved quite challenging. You'd get a lot of problems especially through the winter, trying to hold condition on ewes. On different systems through the winter.
Yeah.
Some ewes thrived and performed really well, and then other ewes, when we started looking into it after the first sort of 12, 18 months, were really inefficient. And they weren't. We weren't probably doing them justice either. But like I said, it was very difficult to when we're trying to treat the whole flock as a whole. So there's about, I think when I joined, then we're running about just shy of 900 ewes. We had a figure in mind of where we wanted the flock to get to, and we sort of worked out what we could realistically carry, and that was with a base of closing the flock down, producing all our own replacements. Yeah, and then just trying to go down the route of producing a more even flock and sheep that we wanted to work with.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm guessing making those changes gradually, so you're not going to be like making massive changes straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. So to go back, I suppose the initial, once we had sort of a route in mind of what we wanted to do in terms of adapting the flock, the biggest one was focusing on the maternal genetics and effectively producing the ultimate sheep that we wanted to farm, that suited the farm here, that made managing them as as easy as possible, and getting rid of problems. I wouldn't say it was a big problem, but mastitis was an issue. With big milky yows that
Yeah,
sometimes we would come in the spring and we weren't getting the best scanning, so they'd only be carrying one single lamb and just huge bags of milk on them that would inevitably end up with issues with mastitis. Feet were quite a significant issue. So that was the initial concept was, right, let's get these issues out of the flock and make them better sheep and easier sheep to manage.
yeah.
Um,
How prone to fluke are you where you are?
Now we have had less and less issues with it as we've improved the pasture and the grazing quality and improved poorer parts of the farm. We seem to have negated the issue. He had been running quite a lot of store cattle, or had, prior to me joining. He'd run store cattle, and I think some of which would have been not wintered outside, but have spent certainly a lot of the autumn outside. And once the cattle went off, we started to see an improvement in less fluke within the sheep,
Okay.
which was quite an interesting thing for me. I'd always, and we can touch on it later on, I definitely think there's a massive compliment running sheep and cattle together, and from a grazing point of view is hugely beneficial. But yeah, certainly from a fluke perspective, he'd definitely seen an improvement once the cattle had left. Whether it was to do with the ground that they were maybe disturbing and turning up, or perhaps we maybe hadn't been using them enough as a tool that they should have been used as. But like I said, that was before I joined. That would have been back in I would have said sort of 2010 to 2014. I think was the last time he ran cattle here.
You touched on grazing. What about your grazing management? Because I think you're doing a rotational system and often and also sort of condition scoring in terms of how often you're doing that.
Going back to what I was saying, so when we obviously started making initial changes with the genetics with the sheep, we started to look at, right, well, what genetics do we want to bring in, and going down that route of good forage based genetics that had been produce for a purpose. That's when we fell upon Innovis, and Callum had actually first started purchasing some of the Aberfields back in 2014, so a couple of years
Okay.
before I joined. I suppose, yeah, the bigger picture was that focus on the sheep and getting the sheep right, but then to get the best out of these forage based sort of genetics we need to really get a handle on how we're grazing and how we're managing as pastures, especially with the intentions of increasing the flock and increasing the productivity of the farm from a sheep point of view. How can we get the pastures performing better, and without looking down the route of just going down with reseeding and improving and getting newer swards of grass down. It was actually, how can we improve a lot of this good permanent pasture that we had, that we knew had potential, but it was just unlocking that.
Yeah.
And that's how we got sort of set up and went down the route of grazing, getting the flock onto sort of a rotational grazing system, with ewes more or less throughout the whole year, and then when their young stock come on, when the lambs are coming in the spring. Now, how can we set up a grazing platform to best get the lambs up and going and thriving through the spring, the summer, and then looking at really pushing them to perform as best as they can up until weaning, and then and finishing them as quick as possible.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that's not only improved your efficiencies generally, but also reduced your costs.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, and that was another big focus of ours, was to how can, and it all came down to the use profitability and efficiency, and how can we reduce the management costs and the running costs of what we're doing. One of which was increase the capacity of stock we could carry, but we were conscious that we didn't want to do that without being efficient with what the ewes were doing.
Yeah.
It's all well and good just carrying more stock, but are you actually making more profit per head while you're doing that? And, that was a big focus of ours.
Yeah. What about sales? Where are you selling your lambs, and are you selling as stores? Are you selling as fat lambs?
Yeah, so I suppose we're very flexible in terms of, we have a rough idea, I suppose, going into the season of what lambs we're expecting. We know what we're performance recording, so we know where we're going through from the point of marking lambs. We know right the way through this. We have a projection of where the lambs are going to be by a certain day. If we can keep them on that positive rise, positive daily live weight gain, we've got a good idea of where we're going to be. And with measuring pastures, we've got an idea of the platform that we can then wean onto. Will I try and direct sell? Depending, it could be anywhere between 150 or 200 to 300 lambs, direct sell them off mother at weaning.
Okay.
And then, yeah, depending on the grazing platform we've got in front, we may look to sell a few stores, or retain them and put a few kilos extra on them before we look to sell. But we try and have all trading stock off the farm by the 1st of November. We've sort of worked out that now as a good time to shut the platform down from a fattening point of view, and then focus on creating pasture covers and forage there for the ewes, carrying them through the mating period and then into winter. For us, it's all about managing projections and what fodder we have available, rather than having sort of fixed dates. So we need to
Yeah.
wrap then the fixed date being November. Up until then, we're quite flexible in terms of where the lambs are at and what we look to shift as and when.
I'm interested in your journey into where you are now. We've touched a little bit on this, but going way back, I sort of want to know where your interest in farming and in sheep is especially, I suppose, came from. But what about your life growing up? What did that look like?
I wasn't brought up around sort of farming or in a farming sort of family. Grew up in a little town in West Yorkshire called Holmfirth. Now, I'm very lucky. I had a great family, very close family with my two older brothers. I was always interested growing up, and my parents always say, we were never really sure where it came from.
Huh.
But I think my initial interest, from what I can remember, it was rather than it been in farming and in stock, it was always in the dogs.
Okay.
And I just, as a kid, I just adored dogs, especially working dogs, collies. And I used to just sit, and there's a lot of farming sort of ground and land around us, and whenever we were out, if there was ever stock getting moved or shifted around, it was a case of just sit and stare and watch.
Yeah,
And I was
you'd be
just
there.
fascinated by the skill of the man and beast, and how they could do it. And sort of from there, then it progressed. I was really fortunate, sort of got a little bit of work. I would have been, oh, probably early teens, just doing sort of labour work, here and there on various different farms. One of the farms, home farm, which was just up in another little village up the road, and their son James, he was a very well renowned dog handler and dog trialist. And he took me in, and I did plenty of work through that for them through the summer. And he could see I maybe wasn't as interested in what was going on when they were bringing the sheep. Once they had the sheep in, it was more watching him work the dogs and
Okay.
getting the sheep in that just fascinated me. And he was brilliant. Like, he just said, I can see you're interested. And I worked with him a little bit. I used to run one of his older dogs, and he sort of taught me the basics of how he handle a dog and how he care for one and look after it and things. But he said, I remember it clear as day. He said, if you want to go down the route and you're clearly really interested in working dogs, he said, you're gonna have to learn a little bit about farming. He said it's not all about this, it's there's a lot more to it. You're gonna have to learn how to work with stock, how to handle sheep and cattle, and once you can do all these things, there'll be lots of work out there.
Okay. So what was your next step after that conversation?
So I would at that time I would have still been at school, and I expressed interest through school in what I wanted to do. And I wouldn't. I was probably to no discredit the school. The school was a fantastic school, and I got on well. But the academia, the literacy side of what we were learning and doing at school, I really struggled with. I never really, because I didn't have an interest in it, but because of where we were, although there was farming and farming families around, and farming, you know, sons and daughters of farmers that went to that school. It's a small minority of the students that were there, and a lot of those guys knew as soon as they left high school, they weren't going on to sixth form. They were gonna leave, and they would probably be going back to the farms at home. So I looked into agricultural college. Um, at the time, I was doing quite, I sort of picked up more and more work through the summer holidays and through all the school holidays and on evenings and weekends and things. I made the decision I was going to stay in at high school, finish what I had to do, and rather than going to agricultural college, I thought, well, another, and this was through the work that I'd picked up through weekends. And you said if you pick up other practical skills, you'll still be very employable. So rather than going off to agri college, I decided to stay on in the area, and I went to another local college and studied like resistant materials, so a lot of woodwork, metal work.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and I think the thing that swayed it for me with that was it was only 2 or 3 days a week max. So I knew in the back of my
Yeah.
head, I thought, well, if I can do that, I can pick up and start doing sort of more full time work. By then, I'd been doing various bits for probably 5 or 6, 3 or 4 different farms in the area. So it worked perfectly.
Yeah. I think
It
this
was
is a
a really good.
great story, actually. I think it's an important point to raise as well, because for people not from farming backgrounds as well, a lot of I often hear is the biggest struggle really is lack of network. And actually,
Yeah,
you've got to
yeah,
build that network. What
yeah.
advice would you give for someone who is starting from scratch without a network? you very effectively managed to work your way up by getting to know people from what I'm hearing here. So, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't say it. I certainly struggled a lot at times with it. I wasn't necessarily a shy, kind of guy, but I definitely felt like at the time, I definitely felt that a lot, farmers, I sat them on a certain pedestal, and I
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
looked at them as because I wasn't, I didn't really know about their lifestyle and things. I was sort of always quite nervous or subconscious about getting chatting with people. I know, like, what do we talk about? Do you know what I mean? I
yeah.
don't know really much about what you do, but but I would certainly say, I mean, I've been very lucky with the people that have put time in to give getting me started. But I think that would be my biggest bit of advice would be just have the confidence, and 9 times out of 10 people will give you the time to sort of chat away and explain what they're doing. And I suppose that's where it all starts. It's it could just be you might you might be out and you see somebody moving stock around or something, and they'll generally give you the time. Just go and ask for what you're up to, and what's going on, what happens at this time of year. And I think that's kind of where it all starts. But it's just about breaking that initial, having the confidence just to break that initial barrier. And it's such a tight knit group of industry, I
Oh,
suppose, that
yes.
one or
Sometimes a
two
little
can.
bit too tight knit.
Well, yeah, definitely. But I certainly found I couldn't believe flipping it out. How do you know them? And
Yeah.
and it's incredible where the links and the connections go. Like yeah,
No, it's just yeah, it's great to hear that bit of your story because I think yeah,
yeah,
that is so important. That's such good advice to just
yeah,
have that confidence just to have that first conversation, that
yeah.
first chat, and and just learn from there.
I mean, a lot of it was a case of you're it's an old phrase, isn't it? But you're a dog's body at that, especially
Yeah.
at that age. You can't. I was never expected to be getting paid for things. I had to give up a lot of time, and it was a case of if somebody asked you to be somewhere, and especially with farming, during the spring, I was push biking up to the farm for 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was a bloody 40 minute 40 minute cycle to get to the yard. But I would make sure, it was a thing my father always said. He said, if they're giving the time, if they're giving you their time, make sure you respect that, and get there for when they want you, and just get your head down, work hard, and it'll be. He always said, you'll be amazed where it'll get you. I wouldn't say there's a lack of that now, but because we've got a young lad who's, we're affected in that he's now working on the farm. He's doing an apprenticeship now through the farm here, and it's stuff that I passed on to him. I said, look, if we want to get on and get a job done at this time, make sure please make sure you're here, and it'll make a massive difference to us and you.
Meet the Farmers is brought to you by RuralPod Media, the only podcast production agency to specialize in the rural sector. We're on a mission to make rural stories mainstream and help businesses, organizations, and communities like you tell your story through podcasting. Podcasting is a fantastic way of connecting with your audience, whoever that might be, getting your message out there and networking with leaders in your niche. RuralPod Media can help you by launching your new podcast or helping you with the technical side. We also provide podcast training and an audit service if you already have a podcast. You're not sure where to take it to next. For more information or to book a call, visit ruralpodmedia.co.uk. That's ruralpodmedia.co.uk. Yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to bring out was when you were talking about when you're at school, and I think
Mm-hmm.
another thing you hear commonly is there isn't really that, I suppose, the knowledge actually at many schools as to what a farming career looks like.
Yeah,
Therefore,
yeah,
you've probably got to do a lot of that work yourself.
yeah,
If anyone is listening, sort of thinking, well, what would my career look like as a shepherd? what would you say to that? Sort of, what does it look like in terms of finding jobs? Again, we talked about networks, but what does it look like
Yeah,
in terms of your career ladder, I suppose, if you can see it like that?
yeah. Well, I suppose it goes from, that casual work and get lending a hand, and then I suppose the big step, and that's the big decision for me then was, getting, if I wanted to take on some more work, I knew I needed to, team up with a dog, and then I knew from that point that it'd be more useful looking at the bigger picture from it. I think like there is probably a general, I wouldn't say misunderstanding, but there's maybe a general thought that there's limited, I mean, agriculture is a massive sector. And,
Absolutely.
there's jobs out there that a lot of the general public would never even assume exist. That's whether you want to go down the line of a stockman or a shepherd or looking after livestock or working machinery dealerships, feed reps, seed reps,
Yeah.
like all these different,
Goes on and on.
yeah, even going on, more down the science-based routes and working in labs, lab technicians, I
Yeah.
mean, there's just a plethora of jobs out there. I think more than educating the youngsters that are coming through the school system, I think that's more from either tuition, like from the tutors or from the parents, that maybe need to understand that it is a genuine, real prospect. Working in the
Yeah.
agricultural sector, there's a lot of really good jobs out there that are are well paid now. And you get well looked after if you're the right person and you suit the job and the role. That there is a genuinely good, prosperous career to be had.
Let's turn towards some sort of general challenges and opportunities of the sheep sector generally, just sort of from your perspective. So, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, when we went through Brexit, there was this great big sort of chat that, oh my goodness, the sheep sector is gonna fall by the wayside, prices are gonna crash. That didn't happen. But
Mm.
in terms of the sector, sort of, I mean, clearly you're in it, you live it and breathe it. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm guessing you're pretty optimistic about the future, but what are those challenges and opportunities from your point of view?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're right, Ben, and it's something that always plays in the back of your mind that is there a future in what we're doing? Um, I suppose for us, and it was a conversation myself and Callum had here, and if anything, I think it pushed us more, and it pushed us to work harder to work on our profitability from the sheep enterprise and making sure that we were tightening things down. We were pulling out unnecessary things that we didn't need to be doing and making sure we were just focusing on, heading in the right direction, making sure that all our inputs were necessary inputs. Because by negating those extra things that weren't necessary, we start to see huge, like we were recouping a lot of cash that we were maybe spending unnecessarily, and we were then either reinvesting that or that was helping to boost the profitability of the flock. Sheep are generally, you can start to see improvements, or if you start making changes, I suppose within a flock, the sheep generally is, it's quite quick to start to get those. I mean, you're breeding stock, you can be breeding stock at a year, well, we took 18 months old, and
Yeah.
or even less, if you took breeding ewe lambs, so you can start to really crank improvements quite quick. But to get a whole flock at a point where you're happy with where you're at, it is a long game. So if we were to start worrying and panicking about what the markets were going to do and whether there was going to be a business for us, we would have been starting to take steps backwards if
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
starting to worry too much about what we're looking at in the future. We've been very fortunate that sheep meat forecast has done nothing but rise since the Brexit debates, and the decision was made to leave the EU. And I suppose, yeah, we were lucky in that respect. But I mean, you can't necessarily just play the game. Otherwise, if had we decreased the flock by X amount, and tried to tighten things up that way, the forecast has done what it's done. If you try and play it too much, I think you're almost then you're too late. Then you're playing you're
Yeah.
taking a couple of years to then catch back up to where you were, and you've missed that window.
Well, you're clearly a great team, and if you weren't, you wouldn't have been named Agri-Scott Sheep Farm of the Year in back in 22. What was that like?
It was a great thing to get involved with. It all came as a big shock, really. We were approached, or we'd received sort of information that we'd been put forward. So there's farmers from across the way, and all would get a collection of farmers get put forward, get put into a pool, and then came out for a visit. The guys from Agri-Scott came out. The first visit was very much a formal visit, just come and see what we're sort of doing and what the business is, what we're trying to achieve, and this, that, and the other, and see the farm. And then I think the second time the guys came, we were looking sort of more into the how we're running the flock and the business to sheep enterprise
Okay.
and the whole farm. It wasn't necessarily, well, it was focused on the sheep flock, but it was everything else around what we're doing, not just farming them and running the sheep as a business. It was more around how we're getting the local school involved, doing projects with those guys. So the rural skills and classes at school come up twice every month and do a session with us. So depending on the time of year, we'll get involved in handling stock, understanding what we're doing if we're treating stock, our forecasting, so why we're doing things now, looking forward and towards next spring, and whether it's down to, managing the pastures, fencing, general skills around. And to be honest, I think from speaking to the guys, once we found out we'd won, it was like, how we pulled that out. And for the guys that came and judged us, I think for them that was the difference. That was the point of difference. It wasn't just necessarily about the sheep business. There's plenty of farms out there, and I never say in a million years that our sheep are the best sheep in Scotland by any means, or we're doing everything spot on as we want, right all the time. Like, we make plenty of mistakes, and there's plenty of improvements still to be made. But I think it was the bigger picture of how we're trying to, like I say, get the school involved, working with other companies in terms of doing research projects, running trials and things like that. Trying to stay as far ahead of the game as we can, or at least trying to make those improvements as much as we can.
Yeah.
And that I think that was sort of what manages to get that award.
Yeah. Well, I know it was a couple of years ago, but congratulations again.
No,
Um,
spot on. I mean, it's never a bad thing. I mean, it was nice just to get that recognition. You spend a lot of time and put a lot of work into making the improvements we've made, and to sort of get that backing, from the guys like at Agri-Scott that see a lot of, they'll go and see a lot of places. They know the industries very well. They'd a couple of panel members from QMS. They'd guys from one of the software companies, AgriWeb. The guys from other fellow farmers. The previous last year's winner, they joined the panel. So they did a good range of people with it.
yeah.
That are strung throughout the whole of the sort of sheep industry, looking at what we were doing. So it was certainly a night, it's a little bit of a confidence boost. It spurs you on to think, right, well, at least they think we're heading in the right direction, and so do we. So that's a good thing.
In terms of the future, in terms of what's next, is business as usual, or any changes on the horizon?
I mean, we're always planning. So we're just about to sort of sit down and work on another sort of 5-year plan in terms of what we want to do with the sheep, and then what I would like to do personally as well, and how we could maybe get more involvement financially with the flock, and
Okay.
perhaps, we're looking at like the option of more like a share farming or a contract farming setup. I think for me that'd be the next sort of big step in where I want to go, and what I want to do with sort of my career. from a sheep perspective, we're always looking to tighten things up and improve efficiencies and genetics. That comes with genetics, animal health, and grazing management and
Yeah.
nutrition. One of the bigger factors would be to try and look at the longevity of how we can keep farming sheep on the same ground when we're starting to get challenged by issues with parasites, and it's an ongoing issue, but trying to stay ahead of the game. We're not to hide the fact we run a very heavily stocked. It's an intensive system,
Yeah.
and with that, it produces a lot of challenges, especially with parasites and young lambs going through the spring and summer. So, we've invested in certain products. So we run our own vet counting system now. So we do all that on farm, and that allows us to get quick results, and also allows us a quicker response if we need to go in and treat.
Yeah. Sorry,
Certain
listeners who
stock
don't know that
classes.
that's fecal egg count.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. I
So
mean,
many farming
I'm
acronyms.
yeah. I've tried. No, I mean,
You've done
I'm
well.
happy
You've
to
done
get
well.
technical stuff, but I do worry that certain people would probably switch off and get bored when we started delving into that sort of thing. But it's been a massive game changer. We've been, since I joined CALM, we've been very systematic of how we've making sure that we're only treating stock when we need to treat stock, and making sure we're treating them with the right thing, and that product's been effective in what we're trying to achieve. That was doing external testing and things. We've picked up other problems, and that's why and certain seasons give us more challenge than others. That's why we're down the route with trying to do as much as we can in house. And that's just given us more efficiency again in terms of how quickly we can react to problems, and making sure that, like I said, we're not doing anything unnecessary. If we continue to do things unnecessarily, all we're doing is stabbing ourselves in the back come the future. I plan to hopefully continue running the flock here for as long as I can. So, I'm conscious that we need to be careful. It's all well and good chasing production and efficiency, and getting lambs to fly as fast as we can. But if we're not doing that while protecting the future stock, then we're really gaining nothing. We're shooting ourselves in the foot big time.
We are going to have to start to round this up. That's been a great chat. I'm going to ask you the final questions, which I ask everyone when they come on the show. The first is, Ed, if you had a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
Because of the challenges that I had, and like we briefly touched on earlier, when I was trying to get into the industry, I suppose, I think my biggest message would be for whether it be tutors or parents or people around, people that are sort of around and are sort of guardians of younger folk. It'd be for those guys just to look at agriculture and look at the livestock sector in particular, and understand that there's really good opportunities and careers out there for young people. That it's amazing when we've had these school kids up, how many, some show general interest, and I think part of that is they just see it as a good way to get out of the classroom. But others, you can see it in them. They've got, it sparked something, and if it just means that they go home and speak to them folks and say, oh, this, I really loved that day up there. It was awesome what those guys were up to. Is that something I could do later on? And if the parents have been able to see and research routes in for their youngsters into the industry, then I've gone on a massive tangent there, and I probably haven't put it all across that well, Ben. But I think that'd be my message to the public.
Yeah, I think that's a great message, and I have no doubt that you will have inspired. Hopefully, there'll be some younger listeners to this particular episode who are thinking about careers, thinking about where they're going. I'm sure you will have inspired them. And finally, the final question: your message for your fellow farmers, a message for farmers. What would it be?
I go out there, and you meet a lot of people, genuine, that just absolutely, they're so passionate about what they're doing, and it is hard to take when you're getting setbacks, and it's such a, as a business, as a very, it's a very precious business to be running and an industry to be in. You see that passion and you see the drive that people have, and I think it's just at times just take a minute, give yourself a bit of recognition and a bit of credit for things that the hard work you put in. Take time away to step off the farm and go and see what other people are up to. Whether you take home other messages from other people and implement them in your systems, keep pushing forward, keep expanding, your knowledge base. I love it. The days we get off farm, we've been involved with various grazing groups and been to God knows how many different meetings. And those days you spend away, it really gives you, you come home and even if you picked up a few little pointers or things that you think, we could definitely look into, implementing that, and it gives you a buzz. It gives you a bit of extra energy to get out there and crack on. I know I'm biased, but I think it's one of the best industries out there to be involved with. And now sometimes I think we can get a bit bogged down on the fact that we're put under a lot of pressure and scrutiny. And actually, it's a lot of hard work and good work that's gone on, and people doing the right things. So I think that just a bit of self credit from time to time doesn't go amiss. And we're not very good at it, but it definitely does help, I think.
I think that is a really positive way to end the episode. Ed, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really,
No,
really
not at all,
appreciate
Ben.
your time, and it's been great hearing your story.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, just the last one to finish. I think you know, I know a lot of people that are very similar to me. I mean, we do a lot of traveling and driving, sat in a machine, and the work that you guys are doing. There's a lot of the podcasters out there like you, and I mean, there's tons of stuff now on YouTube and things, and
There
it's
is.
all great stuff. Like it's it's the future of the industry, isn't it? It's a great way to network. It's a great way to put messages out there, and it's generally now how a lot of people consume content and things. So no, it's been a pleasure, and no, it's very good to have sat and had a chat. It's been good fun.
Great. Thank you, Ed. That is it for today. That's it for today's episode. Huge thanks to my guest, Ed Munt, for coming on the show. Thank you also for listening. Next time, we will be heading way down south. We'll be in East Sussex, and I'll be joined by flower and herb grower Sinead Fenton. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.